Hey, welcome to our 80th show. Welcome to Venice Beach, the veritable edge of Western civilization. Today is September 28th, maybe. Could be 29th, could be, 29th, yeah, sure. Why not? Monday, Moon Day. So, it's a beautiful day. It's a little windy, a little chillier than it has been. Hence the blueness about me. So this is how far we've gotten with it. And today we're going to start putting some paint on it. Spent all weekend doing all this. The fine calculations. What are we doing with that? There it is. Okay. Well, let's see. As far as news goes, Kelly's brother, Jason Phipps, passed away yesterday morning from cancer. He actually was diagnosed 6 months before Kelly. So they've been wrestling with it for like a year and a half. And so it's been a hell of a ride for his family, for their family. Brenda and John and Marion, and their two brothers. So, but it's definitely in a better place. I know everybody says that all the friggin' time, but
you know, I gotta do something that's right or wrong. Tomorrow, the next day, okay? I gotta send something, okay, from here to Arkansas, okay? If I bought one of your paintings and sent it from here to North Memphis, what would it cost me? Seriously, I've been looking at your paintings. I only come to visit.
Out of the frame, it wouldn't cost you much, you know.
Okay, out of the frame, I would want.
Cost you 47 cents, most likely.
Okay, and how much
Like
you
one of
want
these.
for this size?
Those are 15.
14 by 16 or something.
11 by 17.
Yeah.
Yeah, those are 15.
Yeah.
Yep. So the
Cause she told me, she got busted. She's in Arkansas. She came here to paint fields no more because she can't smoke marijuana, and that's all fucking, it's a raw deal. So I was going to send her home some, really good. She said, so I got to leave. I'm looking at the picture.
right on.
Name's William.
David. Thanks, William.
Yeah.
Good luck with that.
I'm really going to have something like fucking exotic.
Okay.
This one right here is fucking awesome. I mean, that's something I'd look at.
Right.
Have you seen this one? Come here. Check this one out. This should be the one. It either has to be this one or this one. Either it just breaks it up and it's all like fucking grass or this right here. question. Let's go get some, put it on the ground, yeah.
So I wrote something last night. I tweeted something about how, you know, life goes on and on. When people die, life goes on, you know. It's so weird. It always trips me out. You know, a couple of years ago, this friend of mine died, and it was very shocking because he was fine. He was fine one minute, and the next minute he was gasping for breath, and he was dead by morning. And he was a picture of health, and all of a sudden he was gone, and it was a bit of a wake up for a whole lot of people. And I was amazed because he was one of the folks that used to set up on the boardwalk. And while there was a huge, a lot of folks came, we scattered his ashes out at the point there on the beach. I was amazed at how, I came back from the ashes scattering, and the boardwalk is just the way the boardwalk has always been, just carrying on. People walking by, having their own universe happening.
They're going to use it.
And that's how this is.
They are like, when I start,
I was really clear of it. And I was like, okay, the whole deal with
I got to feel it.
gradual. And then
When you discover something new, they develop your style again. Then spread it. So you see all over the place. I have your style, they take your style, they develop. The next 4, 5, 6 years, your style, you are the one you created, but you go to another. But they don't.
So I know that we're immortal beings, and that we live forever. And these are our spacesuits we're walking around in. And we're here for such a short time. But it doesn't change knowing all these things, and it doesn't change the emotional truth of grieving and loss and mourning and all that. And then, their situation, I think, Jason, I know Kelly was 42 and Jason was probably in his late 30s. And they have 2 older brothers. So, I mean, imagine if you had 4 kids and 2 of them died of cancer within a year and a half of one another. Crazy. And they were, before all this, they were just like healthy. Kelly was a vegan chef, for Christ's sake. And it didn't make a difference. But so it goes. Feels good.
There you go. That's the answer.
Right?
This is so trippy. Honey,
How are you?
come along. Yourself?
Art is art. Art is Mr. J. It's a red spider.
Well, I was doing some research over the weekend.
There you go. Take care.
And discovered that the world population has grown since last spring. Last spring it was 7.23. Now it's 7.6. 7.26, excuse me. And in the year 1880, which was, I believe it was in the year 1880, there was a total solar eclipse in Wyoming, and Edison and a whole group of these movers and shakers, the officer corps of the Union Army basically became the robber barons of the industrial age. And, it became just like the technology is now the cutting edge, computers and software, hardware, all that kind of stuff, is now the cutting edge of where the money is to be made. Back then, it was, the equivalent was railroads, mining, and telegraph companies. And Edison's early successes was in patents for improving the telegraph. And on this trip out west, all these robber barons and owners of railroad companies and mining companies and telegraph companies they had a big party on this train going out to Wyoming to watch this total solar eclipse. And a good friend of Edison's who owned this railroad company, and they told him he could ride. The owner told him he could ride anywhere on the train he wanted, And when he was a kid, he grew up on the border of Canada and Ohio, and I think it's Canada, Ohio, and he worked. He had a job selling candy on this commuter railroad train, and he actually started a little newspaper on the train, because it would stop at all these stops along the way, and he'd get all the news and tidbits, and then he'd type that stuff up and made prints and sold that with his candy and whatnot. It was pretty awesome. So he loved, ever since he was, this is before the Civil War, well before the Civil War, and in like the 1830s, and so he loved trains, because at that point, the technology, the main technological leader at the time was the steam engine, both in terms of trains and shipping. So he was all about, he loved riding that train every day and selling his candy and getting his money and whatnot, So I'm sure that he had always wanted to do this. So when the owner of the train that took them out to watch this eclipse, this total eclipse in Wyoming, told him he could ride anywhere on the train he wanted, he said, I want to ride on the cattle guard on the front of the train, So it was either on the trip or just before the trip, he had a meeting with somebody that wanted him to take up the research into the incandescent light bulb, because at that point they had light bulbs, but they were using tungsten. And unfortunately, tungsten, if you do any kind of research into it, you find out that, well, tungsten can be used for lighting. It's also, one of the main problems with it is that it's one of the hardest substances on the planet next to diamonds. And it the problem is that while you can get it to light up, you know, it also creates a lot of heat. It creates as much heat as it does light, and so the light bulbs would burn out really fast. And plus, it was hard to get substance, so it made it that much more expensive. You know, it wasn't cost effective. So they knew the principle it would work, but they needed to develop something that would be cheaper and not burn out as quickly. So he had this meeting, and these folks came to him with this idea that, you know, because he'd proven himself to be a pretty frugal researcher, very productive researcher, and so an effective researcher, you know. So they came to him, and they suggested that he take up this research into the incandescent light bulb. So I had this picture of him on this journey where he's going to see this total solar eclipse, and he's riding on the cattle guard of this train through this territory, through Wyoming and South Dakota, you know, through the Black Hills, which, you know, 10 years before was, 4 years before that, you know, was Custer's last stand, 1876. But by 1880, the Lakota Indians, in all the Indians, the natives that had been combatants in that war had essentially been neutralized one way or the other. They had been chased out of the territory into Canada, or they had been forced onto reservations. And and at the same time, you had this, and the reason why this whole thing came about 10 years before, there had been gold found in the Black Hills, you know, and by Custer of all people, and that had, you know, forced the government to renege on its treaty with the Native Americans there. To the Black Hills was supposed to be there for, quote unquote, as long as the grass growed and the rivers flowed. But when they found gold in there, that whole thing got shredded, and that's what was the impetus for the Native Americans to rise up, which eventually led to the arrogance of Custer's last stand, where he went in there basically to annihilate, and ended up running into 10,000 Indians with his 5 companies of cavalry, and there was no match. So here we have 4 years later. The place is so passive, so much pacified, that, you know, the handwriting is written on the wall that, you know, the future, it belongs to technology and capitalism, and with all its successes. And what ends up happening is there's Edison riding on this train through the Black Hills and through the Wyoming territory to watch a total solar eclipse in a world where the only illumination is with fire. The main source of oil for lanterns is either kerosene or whale oil. And you know, in the North and South America, but in Europe it was still kerosene or olive oil. And but still depending on the flame. And so I actually painted a painting about this. I painted it a couple of times, and my father has the original. I gifted it to him at one of my first art shows. And the composition is basically this minus all the sacred geometry. This is the background, and there's an incline like this to the front of a train coming in on this side, and a human figure sitting on the cattle guard, and this sky covered in stars, and this mist along the bottom, and it's like the train is heading into the mist. And yeah, it's called Edison Contemplating the Incandescent Light, 1880. Blah, blah, blah. Smile. How did I get into that? How did I get into it? Oh yeah, I was binge watching this show last week called Revolution. And it was the whole second season, 22 episodes. And I binge watched the first season last year, and they just put the second season up last week. And I, of course, had to watch it. And the premise of the show, if you haven't seen it, is that the show begins 15 years after there's a blackout, a global blackout. So imagine if something like that happened like right now, right? You would never see this unless you're watching live. The whole world's technological advancement would all come to a screeching halt, and people would be left with wherever they are. That's where they're at. Most of the cars wouldn't work, and the vast majority of them wouldn't work because they're based on electricity. Hello.
Hello, it's very beautiful.
Yeah,
Amazing.
I was going for very beautiful and amazing. Oh, you're still there.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
In my blind spot.
Sorry.
That's okay. There's more right here too. Fondling is encouraged.
Have a good day.
Already having it. It's been one of those days. It's been a couple of days like that, actually. People are just walking, not really stopping. I think that James fellow is the first person that's actually touched the work today. There it goes. It's the boardwalk. One day it's magnificent, the next day not so much. There's a Yannon belt. Oh yeah, the show, right? So it starts 15 years after that blackout, where the whole technological thing comes to a screeching halt. And I'm not going to tell you the whole story, but I finished watching it, and on the last, as the credits, just before the credits were rolling, it said that, you know, 1.3 billion people live without electricity. Right? And I actually stopped the movie, read to make sure I read that right, and then because I know, you know, the population is 7.2. I thought it was 7.23, but I checked the worldometer, right? And for world population, it said that it had gone up to 7.26, right? And then I checked, something said that check what the population was in 1880. Because I knew that that's, you know, that 1880 was when Edison started to take up the research in 1880. That was the beginning of electrification, global electrification, and you know, that was what, approximately 130 years ago. So I checked the population, and guess what? Remember the number: 1.3 billion people live without electrification right now, today, in 2014, right? Guess what the population of the world was, of the whole world was in 1880? Yep, exactly 1.3 billion people. So there's the same number of people living without electrification now as there was in 1880. It's just that there's also 6 billion people living with electrification at the same time. And you know, it also says that we've only had electrification for until the 1880s. People have been living without it forever, as far as we know. I mean, as far as recorded history goes, right? You know, barring the notions of Lemuria or Atlantis or any other, you know, pre-Diluvian high civilizations that may or may not have had electrification, right? So, what I'm intrigued by this show, you know, that takes place in a world that was technologically advanced and then suddenly is not. And the reason why it isn't is because apparently the premise of the show is that you know, there was an experiment in you know, sponsored by the Department of Defense that went haywire. And this experiment released these nanites into the atmosphere. And the thing about these nanites is that they basically absorb electricity. So they reached the number of nanites in the atmosphere reached a point of critical mass where they just absorbed all the electricity, hence the blackout. And you know, while this is unlikely to occur, we have so many other things that could cause something similar to happen on a global scale, like some of the things that have happened in the past, you know. In my research for the books, the sequel to my Emergence Beyond 2012 book, you know, looking into the Hopi story, there's, you know, in their tradition, there have been 3 previous world destructions. The first by fire, and the second by ice, and the third by flood. Okay, so there's kind of a developing consensus that the third destruction by flood occurred somewhere around 12,000 years ago. And I think I've talked about this before on this show, that 2 years ago there was a 2 different teams of researchers discovered, came to the same conclusion about an event that occurred 41,000 years ago. And that was, there was a temporary pole shift, reversing of the Earth's magnetic poles. It lasted for approximately 440 years. And this event that they discovered through studying this data having to do with ice cores from Greenland, determines that, or coincides with the Hopi story of the destruction that occurred during that second disaster calamity, where the earth rolled over twice, the mountains fell into the sea, the oceans flopped over the land, the earth wandered through space, and essentially it sounds like it stopped rotating, and it for a number of years, they said, and the whole earth froze for a number of years, and then the earth started rotating again, and the ice melted, and the people came out of the survivors came out of the earth because they had gone into the earth to survive. So we know that happened. Approximately 41,000 years ago. And what's interesting is that the significant, I've mentioned this before, there is a wobble to the Earth's wobble, right? And the Earth's, the pole does this really strange thing it has this cycle of 41,000 years where it moves the wobble itself. The Earth is tilted over at approximately between 22 and 24 degrees. It's tilted over. Instead of being like this, it's tilted over like that. And so it actually moves over a period of as the Earth's rotating like this, like a top. The tilt moves from 22 degrees from north to 24 degrees and back again, right? And it takes 41,000 years for it to do one complete thing, right? So as it happens, the Earth right at this moment, today, is at the same point in that tilt as it was when this polar shift happened 41,000 years ago. So what, David? Who cares? What difference does it make? Why is that important? Don't you have anything better to do? Talk about that stuff or think about that stuff? No, I don't. I find it fascinating. You know, most people, I've said this before, you know, I used to be a substitute teacher, 7 through 12, and I would do this little spot test for my classes to give people an idea of how important, you know, history is. I would ask, how many people, you know, just randomly, how many people could tell me in the class, right, could tell me when the Second World War was and who were the combatants? And, you know, there'd be like maybe tops, on a good day, there'd be maybe 5 out of 30 people. And then I'd say, okay, so, you know, I'd be very liberal there, you know, because it's usually just 1 or 2. And then I'd say, when was the, and this was in the early 80s, right? This is like 81, 82. So that what was that? Where are we? That's 35 years ago, right? And that was only 1980, let's say 1980. 45. That was 35 years after the end of the Second World War. And the children of those who had grown up during the Second World War had no idea of when it was. But then I would ask, you know, how many people could tell me when the First World War was? You know, the war to end all wars, the war that ended on the 11th day of the 11th month at the 11th hour. Hello. Doing a live stream here. And so nobody knew. Nobody had a clue. And that was, at the time, that was, what, 70 years? Less than 100, less than a century after the event. Nobody in the class could tell me when the First World War was.
Oh my God.
So right now, 100 years ago, the First World War was a month old. And, you know, approximately 20 million people died in that war. And right after the war, there was the Spanish influenza epidemic that went around the world. And another 18 million people died from that. It was a great culling of souls. You know, in the space of less than a decade. You know, 38 million people died of non-natural causes. Yeah, that's pretty amazing. Thing is, you know, when somebody dies, where do they go? It's not the end. They obviously go into the astral planes. So suddenly the astral planes are flooded with this influx of souls, of a generation, really, of souls, a generation of souls. Who all died very heavy and dense deaths through the influenza or through war. Violence, trauma. And then 20 years later, less than 20 years later, the whole thing starts up again. First in China, and Japan invades China. And then in Europe with the Spanish Revolution, Civil War, excuse me. Eventually results in basically the fascist conquest of Europe and Africa and the Middle East. So, for some reason, I'm pretty fascinated by these things. I feel like there's something I need to realize about it. Like, for instance, like this show that portrays the world where suddenly there's no electricity. What would happen?
Yeah. Yeah, that's guys. Huh? Yeah, I see it. Yeah. Sorry, Lee. Get everything done. Yeah, no, that's a car. Nice. Working something in Las Vegas. Right.
But now I'm remembering in Europe, I think they have like rocks on the top. They're called it probably possibly.
I was talking to my friend Tina yesterday, about Jason's passing. And one of the things we talked about was I told you about Kelly. He had this book that he had been working on for most of his life. It was a 12-book series, and he only completed the first book. So the story died with him, and that was a big part of his life, was that story. I mean, he named his son after the main character in his Astro Fantasy novel, And
Hi, buddy. Love that.
so what I was talking to Tina about is like, it's really easy to think that what we think the universe wants our mission to be is important, and it's really easy to think that how important it is
by now. Okay, I'll be back. That.
You know, Tina pointed out this whole idea of Ecclesiastes, you know, that there's nothing new under the sun, and everything and all is vanity. And we like to think that, you know, what we're doing is so important to the universe and all that. But maybe not so much. So I looked at, you know, all of my work, stuff that I've spent my life doing. I mean, if I died right now, you know, there's 2,000 canvases sitting in a public storage unit. Thankfully, the rent is paid today, but you know, what would happen to that work? You know, it would fall, either somebody would get it through auction or it would go to my sister, hopefully. And then what? You know, 2,000 canvases. Look like this. You know, never mind manuscripts and drawings and photographs and all this stuff. It's on hard drives and in the computer, or even hard copies. You know, I still have a couple of manuscripts that have never been published. Nobody's ever seen them but me. You know. Is that important to the universe? Important enough to make sure that it gets there? Well, or is that just vanity? Think that it matters to the universe enough to make it happen. And if so, like, when? How? You know? Or am I just pulling my own chain? So what does life look like if you're not pulling your own chain? You know, thinking that, you know, you have some grand mission to accomplish, that you're, you know, here to help the world be a better place and all that kind of stuff. What's that look like? Is it arrogance to think that is it just arrogant to think that, you know, we are, what we're doing is, you know, we're here to make a difference in making the world a better place through whatever, you know, through sitting here and painting a painting. And the answer to that question is really simple. I was actually thinking about this on Saturday, the day before Jason. On Saturday, I was setting up right in the space next to me here. And there was an African-American young man who, he was hanging out with a person who had the booth next to me. And he said, out of the blue, he asked me if I'd made it to Burning Man. And I said, yeah. And he he proceeded to tell me that he'd seen me painting out there on 2 occasions, years that he had made it, and he, I'd never seen this guy before, right? And he's telling me that he had been aware of me painting sacred geometry like years before everybody and their uncle was became aware of it, and I had no idea that what I was doing back then was had an effect on him, personally. And so here it is years later, apparently he'd been watching me for over a decade, developing, this body of work. And that got me thinking that day about how I was actually thinking about Kelly, and I was thinking about how whether we accomplish what our goals are or not, the fact that we're, how we live, and that we make it a point to live in a way that may inspire others to live well, to live their dreams and visions, is it's priceless, And I know that even though Kelly didn't finish that book, that story, that he succeeded in inspiring tens of thousands of people, if not hundreds of thousands of people, and I know that I've done the same, and I know that I've made a difference in people's lives. And then Jason died the next day. Next morning.
Like you never said that before. You want to say
And talk about a kind soul. Talk about a good person, Never over helping Kelly get out of bed, get to the bathroom. That's how we met.
Hello.
Hello. What's up?
Just looking around. It's amazing.
I was going for amazing. Can I always say that? Going for amazing.
Yes, girl.
Well, it's getting to be that time. 13%. Sun's getting low. So it looks like, I'm eventually going to have to start doing this at 4 o'clock. Probably in a couple of weeks, like 2 or 3 weeks. All right, brother. Wow.
Surface. Why not fly in to the Air Force Base?
But then again, maybe all this is just masturbation, right? Maybe it's all just vanity. And it's all just vanity. Then again, the universe uses everything, right? Everything is fertilizer. Some would say everything is shit, but I prefer to see it as fertilizer. May we live fertile lives. What? Fertile lives. What do we got? 4%. Okay. I think I've got myself into enough trouble today. Creatively speaking, of course.
jump. It's not worth it.
Oh, okay. Start packing up. Shows you how fast the Earth is tilting. Was it like a week and a half ago? The sun was. Hello. The sun was setting significantly later than it is now, that's for sure.